All right, the moment we've all been waiting for to listen to me talk about automated testing with Salesforce CPQ and Revenue Cloud. I'll be your host today. I'm Joe Garza. I'm the Director of Solution Engineering here at Provar. Been with Provar for a little over 3.5 years now. Been in the quality assurance testing space for a little over 7 years now. Done manual testing, automated testing, as well as being a quality assurance manager in the past. So, with that said, we're going to go ahead and get things started. As far as our agenda goes, I know that most people, when they receive a demo or they're looking at a webinar, what they really enjoy the most is going to be the slides. So we're going to spend all of our time on slides and just 1 minute in the demo. So if you think about going to a restaurant, we're basically going to spend all of our appetite just eating the chips and salsa. We're barely going to touch the main course. Kidding. We're going to spend most of the time in the demo. This is going to be a 3-course meal. So we're going to start with the appetizer, which will be our slide deck. From there, we're going to go ahead and jump into our demo. Again, we're going to spend the bulk of the time there. And lastly, at the end, we're going to open up to a Q&A session. So throughout, if you do have any questions, feel free to throw these into the Q&A section or the chat inside of Zoom, and we'll be sure to answer these towards the later half of the session. Now, firstly, we're just going to go ahead and give you a brief overview of CPQ and Revenue Cloud. We're going to talk about the challenges of automated testing with these platforms and where Provar fits into the picture. So, as we all know, Salesforce decided to kill CPQ. It's no longer being offered. And now you can buy Revenue Cloud, which includes CPQ. And of course, well, costs more money. So in true Salesforce fashion, we're pushing Revenue Cloud. And what does that entail? So Revenue Cloud, it's going to include the components of CPQ, but there's going to be some additional layers on top of that. The top row of this that we can see here, this is mostly going to represent what CPQ is, and the latter half will be mostly what Revenue Cloud offers. So the way that this works in practice is, traditionally speaking, a customer or a prospect will express some interest in a product. So they'll go to your customer-facing website, fill out a form, send their information in, and then that'll create a lead inside of Salesforce. Then a sales rep will go ahead and qualify this lead, the opportunity, gather the requirements, and from there, they'll go ahead and create a quote for this prospect. After that, they'll send this quote out to the prospect, and hopefully the customer or prospect will approve this. From there, we'll create a contract for this prospect. Ideally, they'll go ahead and sign that for us. We'll create the order, fulfill it, and lastly, collect the money on that. So as far as the components go with Revenue Cloud, as far as the setup goes, that will be handled in Catalog. So this is where you would set up your price books, your products, the pricing rules, any approvals that would be required for these products. Primarily in regards to testing, you won't necessarily test the catalog side of it, but this is where you'll receive the data to then test within CPQ the pricing rules applied. So CPQ is where the sales user would then configure the products in for the prospect. From there, they would go ahead and create the quote, again, send this out to the prospect. This would then go into the contracts, setting up the orders, and lastly, the billing side of things. So again, we're going to stay very brief here. We're going to move into the testing challenges of this. This is primarily my focus, having been in the quality assurance space. So first and foremost, the complexity. So CPQ, it has a very unique DOM structure to it. We're interacting with elements that exist in the shadow DOM. Now, what you need to understand about that is it's complex. It's very difficult to interact with these elements from a traditional testing standpoint, something like Selenium. In addition to that, it's very dynamic. So depending on the price book that we're interacting with, the products that we're interacting with, and then the services and add-ons, well, the layout of these screens will change entirely based off of that. And the one main thing to point out is, while interacting with CPQ, this is just tables on top of tables within other tables. And tables in general and test automation, it's complicated. We have to ensure that we're interacting with the correct row, with the correct column, to ensure that we're interacting with the right cell in that table. And this creates additional challenges with test automation. In addition to that, we're interacting with multiple personas throughout these scenarios. So again, just talking through that flow of Revenue Cloud and CPQ, you're dealing with a prospect, a sales rep. If there are any approvals required for this quote, we're also dealing with a manager, a director, or whoever else is performing the approvals for this order. And then there's multiple systems included in this. So, and the example provided, maybe the prospect submitted their information on an external application, then it's going to Salesforce where the sales user is interacting with it. And then from there, we're sending out the quote, likely in form of an email. And then for the signature, well, maybe we're interacting with something like DocuSign. So there's 4 different applications we would be interacting with for a test scenario here. So again, interacting with all these different components, different applications, and keeping the data in line, there's challenges that come along with that. Lastly, scalability. So it's difficult to scale in these types of scenarios when there's constant changes to the DOM. So whenever Salesforce creates a release 3 times per year, this is going to create challenges that you will have to then refactor your tests due to elements no longer being the same. And in addition to that, what this ends up creating is a constant rework cycle of us having to fix our existing tests rather than just focus on expanding our test coverage or innovating our product or our company itself. So, to give you guys an example, this is one of our customers, Splunk. So they were just using Salesforce CPQ, not a Revenue Cloud, but this is their flow that they were able to provide in regards to what it looked like to test this. So in their flow, they're interacting with Salesforce, CPQ, then from CPQ, they're creating an order that's then going into NetSuite. From there, there's an email that goes out to the prospect, the customer. So there's already multiple layers there. And then they're also using Apex batch executions throughout this flow. So another layer using the backend data here. So as you can see, it's kind of jumping around these applications as well, and that creates additional layers of complexity in these types of scenarios. Enter the iceberg. So as we all know, icebergs, you can see that surface level of it. What's floating above the water represents a very small portion of that iceberg, whereas the bulk of the mass is actually underneath the water. So when we think about testing this is traditionally the way that testing is done is it's really just touching that surface layer, just the UI portion of it. And when we think about Selenium-based automation, which is the most commonly used solution for test automation, that's mostly what it's going to be touching is just that surface layer, just the UI. The problem with that is that does cause additional layers of problems in these tests. So throughout this, we're going to be interacting with a multitude of different components. So different DOM structures for different applications, Salesforce with their 3 releases per year, the CPQ elements that exist inside of the shadow DOM, all the tables that we'll be interacting with throughout this. And again, these are additional layers of complexity when it comes to identifying and interacting with these elements. Then there's also the difficulty of keeping the data in sync while we're going through all of these different platforms in the scenario. Also, the different profiles we'll have to interact with in this test case as well. So again, if there are any approvals that are required, then we have to sign in with an additional user, interact with that same quote, and provide the applicable approvals with that additional profile in the test case. And then again, a common theme here, the different integrations. So the different platforms that we're interacting with throughout this. And if we do have the ability to interact with this from the backend, interacting with this from the API level or the database level, this is going to allow us to streamline this a lot easier and have a more reliable test. So if you've done automation in the past, one of the things you will know is that the longer a test runs, the greater the likelihood that something can go wrong and the test can have a false failure. And this is commonly due to the wait times applied in the scenario. Say, for example, something doesn't render on the screen in time, and the scenario tries to interact with that element before it exists. Test is going to fail. So interacting with these backend data components, like using a database or an API call, and especially with multiple systems involved, this is going to make your test significantly more resilient And also, if things change in the DOM, again, it's not going to rely on that DOM structure, allowing your test to be that more resilient. Provar is going to solve all these challenges right out of the box for you. We're able to interact with all these various layers out of the box with Provar, making scenarios like CPQ or Revenue Cloud simple to build. We can perform the end-to-end interactions both on the UI, the API level, and even the database level. So we can touch all of those different levels for the data to ensure that we're consistently interacting with the correct things in the test. In addition to that, of course, email validation and be able to interact with the contents within the email are going to be important in a scenario like this, where the customer has to receive this quote, potentially sign this, well, ideally sign this, and proceed forward with the order from there. As I mentioned, one of the greatest challenges with this is going to be the scalability. And as I touched on this, there's going to be a lot of maintenance in scenarios like this due to the dynamic nature of CPQ. So depending on how the UI is going to render based off the price book, based off the products. So the services and add-ons will vary based on that as well. And then the 3 releases per year that Salesforce is going to make. What this equates to from an automation perspective is that there's going to be a lot of maintenance. You're going to have to keep your locators intact to ensure your scenarios are working correctly. And this is where Provar comes in. So again, we're able to interact with those different layers, so the API, the database, to ensure greater integrity throughout the test and resilience to these changes. But in addition to that, we utilize Salesforce's metadata to understand where these elements are located. And the reason why that's important is whenever Salesforce makes a release and they update these elements, maybe they change the position, the DOM structure, the HTML attributes, whatever it is, Provar is going to recognize those changes. And this will also be true for your own deployments that you make. So this way, you don't have to worry about that maintenance. We're taking care of it for you. In addition to that, like I mentioned earlier, CPQ has a shadow DOM. Again, it's very difficult to interact with. Provar also offers our own specialized locators for these elements. And so this way, again, we're taking care of that maintenance out of the box for you, and you don't have to worry about that. Oh man, I did not meet my quota of 59 minutes in the slide deck. I guess we're going to have to jump into the boring part here. The actual demo itself, we'll have to fill up the time with that. So with that said, let's begin with the fun stuff. So like I mentioned, I'm going to do a live demonstration on this. I have nothing prepared for this. I'm going to build all of this for you right in front of you. Now, there's just a couple of things that I've done proactively, like set up my Salesforce credentials. So I have my first user here, just using their username and password. I've set up connections for my additional profiles. I'll interact with this test as well. So I have a director and a manager here as well. And we're just going to sign in with these via impersonation with our admin profile. Outside of that, the only other thing that I've done is I've added an Excel sheet here. And all this Excel sheet is just containing a couple of values for me that I'm going to use within my test. Just has 3 rows here. So a couple of product codes that we'll be utilizing as variables. And I'll show you why this is going to be important within the test. So let's begin. We'll go ahead and create a test case. From here, I'll be prompted to select my connection. We'll start with admin. We'll go ahead and reference our application we want to test with. So this will be Revenue Cloud, and we'll go ahead and select Finish. Now, that application list, that is our first implementation of the metadata. So once we established our connection into Salesforce, that went through and cached the metadata for that user and this particular org or environment. So this way, all the elements will be identified through the metadata. Now, once we begin, as you'll see, this launches test builder on the right-hand side. That's going to be used to actually build out the scenario. And on the left-hand side will be the browser or website that we want to perform our automation on. As you can see, we're immediately signed into Salesforce. We don't have to map the fields to go ahead and provide the username or password or even navigate to Salesforce. That was all done through that connection itself, and we're signed in immediately to the application we want. Now, there's going to be a couple of steps that I'm going to want to set up before I start mapping my steps. And this will be to set up my data. All right, so the first thing I'm going to use is this group step. I'm going to drag and drop that in. And I'm going to go ahead and provide a name for this group step. This is going to be data setup. And the first thing that we're going to do is go ahead and import our parameter value source, which will be that Excel spreadsheet that I shared there a moment ago. I'll go ahead and click on this file button, book one, we'll make that selection. The worksheet we'll be utilizing is sheet one, and our variables are across the first row. So just to show you that again, we'll go ahead and pull this over. Worksheet one, and our variable name will be product code on the first row here. After that, there's a couple more variables I'd like to add with this. So to do that, in test palette, we'll go to set values. We'll drag and drop a few of these in here. We'll go back to test palette, set values. So we're going to be using a few of these. This will be for our lead. We're going to need a variable for the first name, the last name, the company, and then lastly, one that encompasses the full name. So we'll go ahead and add these in. Call this one our first name. We'll just provide this a value of first. I'm going to pull up my content assist. This provides me some built-in functions. Unique ID will generate a randomized value every single time the test runs. So every time we'll have a different value for that first name. Same here with the last name. We'll go ahead and set that up. We'll set this with the value of last, and again, a unique ID of 5 characters. We'll make a variable for company. And this again will be company, and we'll use a unique ID here again. And lastly, we'll set up a variable here for our full name. And this will just be a combination of our first name and our last name. And so this will go ahead and get all the data set up that we need to go ahead and begin building out this test case here for us. So we'll save this, and from here, we'll go back into Test Builder and the browser. We'll resume that. Now our data is established. We'll go ahead and begin with this. Now, there's a few ways I could do this. So like I mentioned, we'll start with that lead. I could go through the screen and go ahead and create that, but I'm going to go ahead and show you those other ways that you can do this here with Provar. As I mentioned, you have the ability to easily interact with the various layers. So we'll do this with an API call. I'm going to go to my org browser down here in the bottom. We'll reference our connection. We'll look in the objects, and the one that we'll want to look for here is going to be leads. And we're going to drag and drop this into our test. From here, we're going to go ahead and select the create option. This will allow me to create a lead with an API call. We make this very easy to do out of the box. By default, this will include my required fields. I'm going to add one more in here for the first name, and we'll select OK. And with this, we'll be provided with those fields to go ahead and populate here in this form. We'll reference the last name with our last name variable. We'll do the same with our company and the first name. And then first name, we'll go ahead and reference our first name variable. There's going to be one more thing. So after that lead is created, we need to convert this into an opportunity. We offer a built-in function again to be able to do this. So rather than having to do this in the UI, I'm going to utilize best practices to do this. So we'll use an API to go ahead and convert this. We'll reference our connection here of admin. The lead ID, this is captured as a variable with that API call. As we can see here, this ends in lead ID. That will be the variable that captures that record ID. The converted status will be qualified. Qualified. We'll create an opportunity with this. The opportunity name will be our full name variable. So the first name and the last name. Overwrite the lead source, send the email notification, and we'll save that. If I did everything right, this will go ahead and get everything created for us. We'll go ahead and click on resume. A couple seconds, that lead is created. A couple more seconds later, that should then go ahead and convert that lead into the opportunity, account, and contact. If we look at the test step output, we can see the record IDs included down here as well. So we can reference those as variables if we do need to interact with those later in our test. Now, what we need to do, the lead has been created, the opportunity has been created. Now we need to create our quote. So we'll do this on screen. I could also still use an API call, but I'll just do this on screen to go ahead and showcase how we can interact with those multiple layers simultaneously in the same test. Now, my first step here on screen will be to populate the account field. I'll go ahead and add this in, and the account will use that company name. So we'll just reference that variable that I utilize for company here. The one thing to point out is if you notice, I didn't actually map a step to click into the quotes tab or even click on the new button for the quote itself. So Provar, while interacting with the metadata, it doesn't only understand the locator for that element with the metadata, but it also understands the page that it's interacting with this element on as well. So we'll reference our variable here of company, and I'll show you what I mean. I'm going to navigate off of this entirely. Home is where we started from. But once I click add and do, you'll see this is going to navigate to quotes. I'll click the new button automatically and then populate this into that account name field. So the metadata is really powerful here. Again, it's going to future-proof your test from those changes. But as you can see, it's going to eliminate many of the steps in your test case. That is the common theme that you can see. In reality, we've only included a handful or two of steps here at this point, but these handful of steps are encompassing several dozen steps in reality. So this again is going to reduce the points of failures in your test case, but we'll go ahead and finish populating this. So the opportunity again, we utilize the full name variable for this. So we'll reference that value in here. The other thing to point out with this too, is again in reduction of steps, these account lookup fields, as you see, I'm doing this in a single step, but in reality, if you're doing this with something like Selenium, this would be a multiple step process. I'd have to set a step to type into the field, one to wait for the options to populate, and lastly, another step to select the applicable option from the list populated. But again, with our metadata-driven approach and our intuitive nature to understand Salesforce, I don't have to do all that. The other thing to point out is we also have built-in waits for all of these steps. It's another thing that I'm not having to go through and configure for each and every step that we're performing here. It's done automatically for us. We'll go ahead and save this quote here at this point. Go ahead and get that added in. And the one thing to mention again is similar to that lead creation, when we did that through the API call, this quote's record ID has also been stored as a variable at this time. So this way, again, when we have to interact with those other profiles and we need to interact with this specific quote, that's going to be very easy. And I'll show you how that's done once we get to that point. Now, at this point, we're going to move into the CPQ side of things. So we're going to go ahead and add in edit lines, and this will move us into CPQ. Things will get a little bit different at this point, but no worry there. Again, we have things pre-built to make this very easy and simple for you. So as we're going through this again too, as you can see, while I'm building my tests, I'm actually seeing it execute in live time. And we're knowing that everything we're building is working. Comparatively, if I use a record and playback or something like Java and Selenium, I don't necessarily know if anything's working until I stop and I play the test back, and in which case I could find that there are some problems in my tests. But here we're getting that live feedback. We know that this is working while we're building it. And there's a lot of advantage in regards to time savings with this approach. Outside of CPQ, as you can see, the way that Test Builder is picking up this element is a little bit different. So outside of CPQ, we were utilizing Salesforce's metadata. Now with CPQ, as you can see here, this is mentioning by Salesforce CPQ. We have specific locators that are set up for Salesforce CPQ, and these are built to handle its dynamic nature, as well as the shadow DOM that exists. So I've been mentioning this shadow DOM thing a multitude of times. I'm going to show you in a moment what that looks like here and why that is so difficult from other solutions testing perspectives such as Selenium and anything that would just touch the surface level of the UI. Now, the first thing that we'll see here once we go ahead and click on the suggest button is tables. So again, tables are particularly difficult to interact with because I want to ensure that I'm interacting with the correct cell based on the row and the column we're interacting with. But again, the other thing that I've been talking about quite extensively, the shadow DOM. What is it and why do I care? Well, you're interacting with CPQ, it's absolutely full of these things called shadow root. We can see one right here, but if I continue to scroll up, there's more shadow root, shadow root, shadow root, and it keeps going on. And so if we're interacting with this and we're creating our own locators, we have to specify out all these shadow root layers just to get to this one element. And if anything moves, anything changes, well, it's broke. You now have to go back, fix that locator. And first and foremost, it's already really difficult to get to these locators and map them out. If you've noticed, I'm already going bald to some extent here. And that's because of interacting with these shadow DOM elements, because they are that stressful. Now, the good news is Provar is going to save you from losing your hair like me. So hopefully you're able to get this in place before you have to go through this pain like I had to. And I'll show you how. So we're going to go ahead and start interacting with these elements. Now, I'm going to go ahead and map a checkbox here. Provar is going to go ahead and pre-build this out as a table here for me. We can see it's going to map a new table here directly. It's going to go ahead and map in this checkbox field, and I'll go ahead and select the add and do. Now, when we interact with a table like this, by default, Provar is going to map this to row 1. So we can see it's going to reference row 1. Now, row 1 on this table will be the select all. It'll be this row that I'm highlighting currently. So once this maps, we should see it'll actually select every single product on this. We're going to go ahead and change that here in a moment. I'm going to map in one more element here, which will be the product code. And I'm going to explain why I'm mapping this here in a moment. And it's going to be in reference to that Excel spreadsheet. So this is just simply going to go ahead and map this element out for me so I can interact with this table in a more dynamic approach. So I don't necessarily care what we're doing with this step right now, but I simply need to get this element mapped so I can utilize this to interact with this table more dynamically. Now, the reason why you want to interact with this table more dynamically is you're going to be interacting with different products. You're going to be interacting with different price books, and these different price books, again, different products. And you're going to want to validate the pricing rules, the different add-ons and services that are available with these. So to make your life easier, you're going to want to be able to reuse the same flow that you've mapped out like I'm doing right now. The good news is it's pretty simple to do. You just have to set this up in a parameterized fashion. So that's what we're going to go ahead and do with this portion here. And I'll show you how we're going to do that. So coming back into Provar Studio, go into our test, going to minimize test builder here. We'll go into our test palette, and we're going to utilize this for each step. We're just going to drag and drop that into our test right here. With this row step here, we're going to drag and drop that into our for each loop. With our for each loop, we're going to reference the variable that we set up for the Excel sheet, which by default is simply source data. We'll make that selection. We'll provide a value name. We'll just call this Excel. Now, with this with product selection line row, we're going to go ahead and reference our variables from that Excel sheet. So the product code, this is going to be the column that we're going to interact with from that. And what we're going to do here is we're going to reference Excel. And then this will be dot product code. So now what this is going to do is it's going to reference this variable here. And based on this, it's going to find the row that has the product code of SB bundle -PZ and SB bundle HCPZ. I sound like I'm speaking Italian while I'm reading that. But this is going to allow me to essentially parameterize this. And I can use this test with a different source of parameters. So if I wanted to use a different price book, different products, I run the same test through, and I'd have to rebuild everything from scratch. This is how I would do this here. Now with that, I'm going to do a couple more things. Again, I didn't necessarily need this UI assert step here, so I'm going to remove that. Our checkbox is what we care about. I'm going to go ahead and save this. Coming back into the browser and test builder, we're going to go ahead and step into that step, and we'll go ahead and play this. I'm going to uncheck all these for now. And now, once we resume this, what you'll see happen is, again, we look at that Excel sheet. This should now make the selection into the SB bundle PZ in the first iteration. In the second iteration, this will then interact with this particular product here. So now we can see that first iteration ran. It selected that first one there. We'll go ahead and resume this. And on the second run, this will now interact with the HCPZ product. So again, rather than just specifying a hard locator here, I have parameterized this. Now I'm able to dynamically assign the products within this. So in essence, I don't need to recreate the wheel every single time I'm designing a new scenario for this. Just got to go through this once and reuse this with a different parameter set. From here, I'm just going to go ahead and end my for each loop. We're going to go ahead and add in the select button now. And what you'll see next is more tables inside of CPQ. So like mentioned, tables, tables, and more tables. So what will be presented next outside of the products is going to be our services and our add-ons for the products that we selected in this first table. And you can see there's also additional tabs that we may need to interact with as well, that, as you guessed, also include additional tables as well. So we'll just go ahead and interact with one of these tables. We'll say we want to go ahead and add in this product. So we'll just quickly go ahead and get this mapped in, and we'll continue forward. Now with this one, I'm not going to go ahead and parameterize this for time's sake. We'll just go ahead and map in this one selection. We'll just use a row locator for this one specifically. We'll go ahead and add and do this in. Now again, by default, this is going to be set to row locator 1, which would be this top one here. So once I map this, I will simply make a modification to mention that we do want to interact with row 3 rather than row number 1 on this here. So we'll let this execute here. But in the meantime, we'll go into Provar Studio and we'll make that update while that runs here in the meantime. So here is that step. We'll go ahead and click into it. Set to row locator 1. We'll go ahead and set that to 3. We'll go ahead and save that. It updated here in Test Builder, but I don't think I interacted with that in time, so we might have to re-execute that step to ensure that that does run and make the correct selection here as well. Now, that's one of the other things that's really helpful here in Provar is the fact that you can make modifications in live time, step to that step, and rerun it as you go. So again, if you make a mistake or if something didn't work that first time, you have the ability to make modifications on the fly and be able to rerun it and ensure that it does now work. So now we can see it's going to go ahead and rerun, and hopefully I did everything correctly there. We'll see it get selected. And as we see, it did get selected. Now we'll go ahead and apply these rules, and we'll go ahead and add in some discounts. So like mentioned with CPQ, there's pricing rules that we have to go ahead and perform validations around. In this particular example, there's 2 approval thresholds that we'll be interacting with. There's a manager approval that occurs at a 15% discount or greater. And then there's a director approval that's required for 25% or greater. So we'll go ahead and test both of those thresholds out and ensure that they work. Looks like I have to add in the save button rather than apply rules. So let me go ahead and get that mapped in here real quick. So again, that apply rules button, I'd probably go ahead and remove that since I didn't need that, but for time's sake, we're just going to go ahead and keep this moving forward at this time. Now we'll go ahead and apply our discounts. The first threshold again will be 15%, so we'll go ahead and map that in. Right now we can see there are no approvals required at this time. So we'll just go ahead and quickly add in that 15% discount here. Go ahead and map that, add that in. And then from here, we'll click on the calculate button, which will then go ahead and apply that discount. And in which case we should see that that approval will then populate on a multitude of these rows here. Now for this point, I'm not going to parameterize this, again, just due to time. But in reality, this would be something else that I would parameterize. And again, that would give me the flexibility of reusing this for future scenarios. So if we're interacting with anything else that is utilized in the same table here, I don't have to go through and remap all of this every single time. Because again, well, this is all going to be repeatable. But now we can go ahead and see that that approval has been applied. It now says that there's a manager approval required. So in a similar fashion, we're going to just go ahead and perform a mapping here on product name. so we can ensure that we're interacting with the applicable row that we want. We probably would iterate through the products here that we felt were necessary to perform the validation on. I'm going to copy this field name. I'm going to utilize that a little bit later. Just going to change this to a read assert. Again, this is a dummy step, just so I can go ahead and map this field and have that available for me to interact with. And then what we'll do is we'll map in the step for the approval. And then we'll go ahead and specify that we want to interact with the Smart Bytes row with this table. Because again, by default, this is just representing row 1 at this time. I'm going to give this a moment just to execute, and then we'll go ahead and map in the approval here for the manager. And then I'll show you how we'll go ahead and handle this from the data perspective to ensure we're interacting with the correct row with this. All right, that finished executing. So similar thing here. This one we do actually want to perform this assertion on, but for the initial mapping, just to go ahead and keep things running, I'm just going to go ahead and do an extraction and not actually assert it, but then I will go ahead and add the actual assertion on this. So we'll go ahead and add that in. While that's running, I'm going to come over here into Provar. We're going to make the necessary modifications with this. So at this point, I just need to go ahead and update this, the way we're interacting with this row. I'm going to minimize test builder here in the meantime. And what we're going to want to do, let's see here, we want to remove the 1, not the entire step. And we want to make sure that this product is going to be equal to, we'll go ahead and grab this value from the UI, Smart Bytes Enterprise Core. And within our quotation marks, we'll go ahead and add that in. This first assertion here, this one we don't need. We'll go ahead and remove that. And on the second one, we want to make sure that this is equal to manager. So go ahead and add in our assertion point now. We'll go ahead and save that. Going back into the browser and test builder. Now at this point, we'll go ahead and step back to the step and we'll re-execute this. And now this should go ahead and interact with the row where it's Smart Bytes Enterprise Core, and this will validate that the approval is in fact manager for this particular product. Now, due to time, I'm going to go ahead and keep things moving. I was going to go ahead and add the additional layer here for the director, but I do want to keep about 10 to 15 minutes for Q&A at the end of our session here as well. So this is the difficult part of doing a live build, is the timing portion of it. But hopefully you guys get the idea in regards to how we perform these necessary validations. At this point, we can go ahead and see that this validation was performed, manager equal to manager, and that was based off of this row here. And again, like I mentioned, if we add that additional discount of 25%, well, now we'll see that there is an approval for the director. I should map those in the scenario, but again, due to time, I'm just going to go ahead and save it at this point. But I would add those additional steps here for the assertion that that does now equal director in this scenario as well. And so now the next steps of this, the additional complexity layer here in CPQ. Now we need to interact with additional profiles in this same test. And how will we be doing this? The good news is Provar is going to make this very easy to be done here in this scenario. So I've already set up the connections for my additional profiles, both the manager and the director. I'll show you how we get those added in and how we'll interact with this specific quote. We'll go ahead and preview the approval. We'll go ahead and submit those approvals. So this way they're ready for our manager and our director. So we'll go ahead and add that in. And at this point, this will go ahead and show who's responsible. It'll be Martin manager and Dolph director. It looks like Dolph Lundgren to me. So we have Ivan Drago here from Rocky 4 performing our approval for us. Go ahead and map that. And at this point, we are now ready to go ahead and bring in our additional users into this test to have them perform their approvals on this quote. So due to time, I'm just going to go ahead and do this with the manager. But again, all we would have to do for the additional user for Dolph is do the exact same thing that I'm going to showcase here to you for the manager. Now in related, we can see in our approvals here for the manager and director, this is now being assigned to them to go ahead and handle that. So going back into Provar Studio, like mentioned, we've already added in our connections for our additional users. The way that we're now going to add them into our tests is within our org browser, which I already had open. Now I just minimized it. We'll just go ahead and look for their connection. In this case, we want Martin Manager. Going to add him into the test just by dragging him in here, dropping him in. And at this point, I just have to configure one more thing, which is the application that we're using, which in this case will be Revenue Cloud right here. And we'll save this. So when it comes to interacting with multiple platforms or multiple profiles within the same test, Provar is going to handle both of these in the exact same fashion, which will be adding an additional browser that controls that profile's or that other website's actions. So anything I map on this browser will be mapped specifically for Martin Manager to perform. So in this scenario, if I did have to go back and forth between the sales user here and Martin Manager, all I would have to do is map my interactions here for the sales user, and for Martin Manager, come to this browser and perform my mappings. I'm going to go ahead and quickly just take this URL here, map that in, and what I'm going to do here is just go directly into that related list, and we'll go ahead and select the approval here that the manager user needs to interact with, which is the one here labeled as Approver Manager. Now, this is going to be done very easily. I'm going to be able to interact with the table from a dynamic standpoint. And the one that we're going to want to interact with the manager is the one that says Approver Manager. So Provar is going to make this very easy. So our tables here for Salesforce are going to be pre-mapped, making it very simple in regards to these types of interactions, easier than what we saw for the CPQ side of it. Now, again, with CPQ, we have those tables pre-built. But the Salesforce metadata-driven ones, well, you'll see, it's going to be even easier here. So I'll be able to provide my row locators or qualifiers directly through Test Builder, allowing me to map this out that much quicker and easier. The other thing to point out with this navigation, as I mentioned earlier, once we created this quote, this did capture that record ID directly for me. And I'll show you how we're going to use that here. And my qualifier here that I care about is the manager. The approval number is dynamic, so anytime I create a quote, this approval number will iterate. So I don't want to use that as my qualifier. I just want to make sure whenever Martin comes in here that he does the manager approval. That's one that he is going to be assigned. Now again, the navigation is going to be handled automatically for me. I'll go back to home, map this in, and showcase how that's going to work. Now by default, this will be capturing that record ID that is represented with this record. I would go into Provar Studio and I would set that variable up for that quote from the record ID that was captured in live time. But as you can see, this is exactly how it's going to perform that navigation to ensure we are interacting with the correct quote. So again, like mentioned, one of the challenges in these tests is ensuring that you are continuously interacting with the same data set. As we can see here, this is going to provide that seamless experience to ensure we are consistently interacting with the same records in our scenario. Now, what we want to do with Martin at this point is go ahead and provide the approval. So we'll go ahead and just update the status here. I'm just going to go ahead and edit or interact with the inline edit so we can go ahead and perform that update and set this to the approved status. So we'll go ahead and start our inline edit. We'll go ahead and add and do with that. And then that will allow me to adjust the value at that point, and then go ahead and save this in. And at which point we would then have to sign in with the director and repeat these steps here. Now, the one thing to point out is everything that I have built to this point is entirely reusable through Provar. You have the ability to segment out these steps as reusable steps. So this way you don't have to rebuild this for your next scenario. And again, this is really important because you're going to have to interact with multiple price books, multiple products, multiple different services and add-ons for these products. And if you had to go through and build a separate scenario out for every single one of these and reinvent the wheel every single time you did this, well, when we talk about the scalability side of that, it's a Herculean effort to do this. So again, having everything built out in a repeatable fashion where you don't have to go through and redo this every single time is going to save a tremendous amount of effort for you at that point in time. Now, at this point, the approval's been done from Martin. We've seen how we can interact with these multiple profiles. The steps that we would proceed from here is we would go ahead and generate the document, send that out to our customer. Hopefully they sign it, return it back to us. We would then go ahead and create the order, create the contract, and then go into the billing and hopefully go ahead and receive the money from our prospect and have a customer at this time. So with that said, that completes our demo. So unfortunately, I did not meet what I mentioned at the start, which was providing 59 minutes of slide decks. So I apologize that I failed everybody here today on that. So hopefully you guys appreciated seeing a live demo. I hope that was valuable in regards to seeing the ins and outs of what we would actually have to go through to build a test case through Provar in Salesforce CPQ and how that's done. So in reality, this does not have to be difficult. All those varying factors with Salesforce CPQ and the shadow DOM, interacting with all these different profiles, interacting with multiple different applications, different layers of data, being able to interact with the API, the backend data, the database, the emails, all of that in a single test flow. These challenges are solved right out of the box here with Provar. Again, making things in a reusable fashion so that way you don't have to recreate the wheel every single time you build a new permutation of these tests. Using parameterization is going to be key to simplifying this, and having those reusable components is going to allow you to create a lot more tests a lot faster, allowing you to scale. And with our approach of handling the elements through the metadata approach, as well as offering pre-built CPQ locators that are able to handle its dynamic nature, this will save you a lot of time in the refactoring and allow you to actually scale your testing efforts rather than just focusing on reworking your tests. So from here, we're going to go ahead and open up to Q&A. So I see there are a couple of questions. There's one from Rakesh. How can someone learn Provar considering it's a paid tool without a trial version? So I see that Emily mentioned our University of Provar. So there are some courses that you can take for free for Provar directly from this solution. So there is some information that you can learn from this directly. Now, in regards to getting hands-on with this, feel free to reach out to our sales team. We'll be happy to help you out in regards to that. When you talk about repeatable, are you referring to making tests callable? Yes, that is exactly what I'm referring to. So when we build our test in this way, you can use your callable tests inside of Provar. So this way you can make reusable components that will allow you to be able to build your tests faster. And also if anything does change, maybe you have to make an update to this. But rather than updating those steps individually in all those tests that are utilizing those same shared steps, now you're just making that one update to that callable test versus all of those tests that are using those shared steps. So in regards to scalability and a maintainability, this is a best, I lost my word there, but a best practice, there we go, in regards to designing your test cases here. From Iqbal, the quote edit screen, we are using JavaScript XPath, and sometimes even the CPQ objects don't work. How to overcome those? So Iqbal, what I would recommend for this is reach out to our customer success team. They will be the best avenue in regards to addressing this specific question. Every implementation will be a little bit different. So having someone who can actually look at your guys' specific setup and be able to walk you through that and provide assistance would be the best approach for that. The other thing to mention is we also do have a community here at Provar. Likely some of our other customers have had similar challenges that they've faced. So posting something there, you might be able to get additional insight as to how some of our other customers, our users, are achieving and meeting these requirements. There's another question here. The version which you are showing is version 3 or cloud version. So Sakiti, this is going to be our V3 version of Provar. So this will be the latest version that we are working on currently. This is the desktop installation of Provar. So we're expecting this to go live here within the next month, allowing our customers and prospects to give this a try and see how it works on their end. From Manjunath, do we have any sessions coming up for Vlocity CPQ specific to Omniscript? So currently, I do not know the answer for this, but our marketing team may have this in the plans. I would have to circle back around this particular question. From SOC, the old CPQ code developed in V2 will work on V3. Yes. So everything that you've created in version 2 of Provar will continue to work inside of our latest version of Provar. There will not be anything additional from your end to have your tests continue to work on this. All right. And with that, we'll go ahead and wrap things up. There's one final question here. Do we need to upgrade to V3 to support Rev Cloud metadata mapping? No, you do not. So the functionality that exists inside of V2 will still be applicable inside of V3 today. There's going to be some additional features inside of V3 that were not available inside of V2, but everything that exists in V2 will carry over inside of version 3. But with that said, everyone, I appreciate your time and joining us today here for the CPQ and Revenue Cloud webinar. Keep in mind, today is Taco Tuesday, so if you do want to fill up on your salsa and chips before the main course, like we discussed, feel free to do so. But again, I hope you enjoyed the 3-course meal we provided here, and I hope you all have a great rest of your day.